Order. Well, can I welcome you this morning, Minister? Could you introduce yourself and your colleagues for the record, please?
Sure. Thank you very much, Chair. Mark Harper, Minister for Disabled People. On my left is Noel Shanahan, Director General of Operations, and on my right, Justin Russell, who's the Director of our Employment and Support Allowance Division.
Okay, well, we've just been given this morning a rather detailed statistical release about the latest PIP figures and waiting times. We've obviously only just got them, which is a bit hard for us in as much as it's pages of quite small type. Could you talk us through, and then we'll have some questions on what they actually show?
Yes, Chair. I mean, the reason, as I said in my letter that I wrote to you last week, which I know has hopefully been shared with the committee, the point of it was to try and get you the latest information. So you'll see from the release, this information is up to the 25th of January, so up to just 3 days ago. So I thought it was helpful to get that. And I said, as I said in the letter, I was very happy, obviously, to take you through the publication, and then obviously very happy to answer questions from colleagues across the committee. So if I'm happy to do that, I'm happy to take questions from colleagues as we go through.
Well, if you start, then we'll interrupt you, don't you worry.
Fine. So the first thing, just to be clear about on page 5, just to be clear, this is for new claims under normal rules. There's a little bit at the end which I'll touch on briefly, which is for the special rules for terminal illnesses. These are for the normal rules, and they're focusing on the new claims because that's obviously the area where last summer people were most concerned about, because obviously it's new claims where people are not receiving any payment until the claim is decided. Obviously for reassessments where people are already getting DLA, they're obviously having a claim in payment until the decision is made. So these are new claims. So the table shows that between the 8th of April 2013, so the start of the benefit, and the end of last year, there were 625,000 new claims. So that's where somebody registers a claim for PIP, and 523,000 referrals to the two assessment providers. The gap is because between the number of registrations and the number of referrals obviously relates to the fact that once somebody registers a claim, we then send out the claim form, and there's a period of time that claim form is with the claimant, or it may be that the claimant's chosen to withdraw their claim between those two dates, or the department's disallowed the claim before it's referred to the assessment provider.
Or it may be that they've died. That's possible as well, presumably.
It may indeed be, yes.
If they were under the special rules.
Yeah, but these ones are for normal rules, but you're right in principle. And we've set out as well there some of the reasons why the decisions are taken. You can also see that the number of referrals to the assessment providers has remained broadly constant at about 30,000 per month. But the number of returns from the assessment providers, so that's where somebody's had their assessment and the assessment provider has then done the report that's come back to the department, you'll see has increased since last summer each month, with over 52,000 being returned since October. And if you look at the figure, the graph on page 7, I think that sets out very clearly the broadly constant referral line, which is in blue, the pink line, which is the returns from the assessment provider. I mean, that basically says, why did we have a problem in the summer of last year? Very straightforwardly, we weren't clearing the number of claims that were coming in, and so the amount out, the backlog was effectively rising. That also shows from last summer, after the Secretary of State had made his commitment to sort this out, and after I'd been appointed, and as I said to the committee and I've said in the House, this was my top priority, we've increased the number of assessments people have had and those returns from the providers, and so as at August we were clearing more cases than had been referred to the provider, so you can see that the backlog was then coming down, and that's you know, we've obviously made a considerable amount of progress since last summer. I think if you look at the average, and that's the median average assessment provider clearance time in weeks, again you can see why we had the problem last summer and why there was so much concern, and why colleagues on the committee and others in the House will have had concern from their constituents. The average clearance time last summer peaked at around 30 weeks. Obviously that there will have been people waiting longer than that and some waiting less time than that. That was the median, the average person. And you can see since that period, that's fallen each month. And as we entered 2015, the average was down to 14 weeks, so more than halved.
Can I ask?
Of course you can.
Just that, is that why we've got the statistics just today? Because you wanted the most recent statistic, because actually the only month on this chart that shows that you're below the 16-week target is actually January. In fact, in December it's still 18 weeks, November and October it was 23 and 22 weeks. And that same month in December 14, instead of the average of over 30,000 referrals, it was only 25,000 referrals. So as it worked through, there might have been fewer, which might explain why in January it appears you're hitting your target, but is it likely to go back up again in February?
No, I mean, I think that the number of claims in December, we don't control the number of referrals is a function of the PIP2 forms coming back and going to the provider. And of course in December there are a few fewer working days because of the Christmas and New Year Christmas holiday. But no, we're not. The reason for using the latest data is this trend is continuing. So the provider performance, and I'll ask in a moment, I'll ask Noel to set out what we've done with our assessment providers, what they've done to improve the performance, but this trend is continuing. So we are continuing to increase the number of assessments we're seeing. We're continuing to see the number of decisions increase. We're continuing to see the waiting times reduce. And I wanted to present the committee with the most up-to-date picture.
So while the trend is downward, and that's good, it still appears as though you've got 110,000 sitting in a backlog as of January of this month.
Well, I think there's a useful debate to have about work in progress and what is a backlog. Any system where you have a big volume business, where you have a lot of decisions being made and assessments, you're always going to have at any point in time a significant number of claims which are work in progress. You're going to have the number of cases that are registered where we've issued the forms to the claimant and the claimant is collecting their information and sending the form back. That's the gap between the registrations and the referrals to the assessment provider. You're always going to have in an efficient...
The figure I've just quoted from the chart on page 9 doesn't include that, because if you add together the ones outstanding with the assessment provider, that's almost 98,000, and outstanding with the DWP is 12,000. So that's where the 110,000 comes from. So that's not sitting with the
No. I was going on to say, but also in a process then where people return the forms and you're going to schedule appointments and make decisions, if you're going to have an efficient system that's working properly, you're always going to have a number of cases that are in that process. So if the system's working properly, you're always going to have, if you're going to keep those assessment providers occupied, properly working and delivering the assessments at an efficient, in an efficient way and a good cost to a taxpayer, you're always going to have in some cases outstanding. And so the backlog is where you're not clearing the cases and not delivering against the expected amount of time. So what I've done on the next slide, on figure 3, which effectively puts the information in the table you just referred to.
That's the table I was referring to.
Yeah, so what that shows is, if you look at, again, in July last year, where the number of claims outstanding, both with the assessment provider and with the DWP, was at its peak, and it's come down then consistently since then. The red line on the graph there just illustrates for the committee how many claims you would expect to be outstanding if we were clearing, if you graph 16 weeks worth of work, and you can see that we've now got fewer claims than that outstanding. I want to go further than that. I want to deliver a better service. So one of the things we're working through at the moment is, where is that point where you've got an efficient operation, you're keeping assessment providers busy and efficiently working through and assessing customers, and what's the lowest level of waiting time you can deliver for customers that's commensurate with that. And that's why we want to continue bringing that down. And when we'll set out later what we think we can do. You'll know across our other businesses we tend to set out waiting times in the style of we'll clear 95% of cases within a certain period, which is so that the customer knows what to expect, but you also recognise that there are always going to be a percentage of complex cases. There are always going to be cases where the customer, often for good reason, fails to attend their assessment appointment and has to be rescheduled. And so that's what we're working through, is to say, well, what should that number be? Because I don't think 16 weeks is where we want to stop. And you can see we're driving it below that. I want to see how ambitious we can be in terms of setting out a better expectation for customers. Where we then set that out and fail to hit that, so cases where people are waiting longer than that, I think you can accurately describe that, and we would describe that as a backlog, but I don't think you should say every single case that happens to be in the system. You're clearly never going to get a system where somebody registers for a PIP claim, they get a form instantly, they send it back instantly, they get an assessment appointment the next day and the decision made the next day. And that's simply not a realistic way of running a business.
I think you're absolutely right that the key is how long the individual has to wait for the whole process. So the fact that the assessment process is 16 weeks or hopefully even less than that, that's 4 months of that bit of the process. But of course that's not how long the claimant is having to wait, because they've got from the point where they pick up the phone to the point where they actually get the money. How long is that process at the moment?
So the period at the front end, of course, is.
No, I want.
No. I'm just saying.
Whether it's in all of it's in your control or not. What is the average time taken for a claimant to pick up the phone, to register a PIP claim, to when they get a decision that they're not getting the money or they actually get the money?
Well, I haven't set that out in the statistics.
No,
because
that's why I'm asking it.
Well, I know. Well. The reason why I wanted to publish the statistics was because the committee in the past, and I know particularly Ms Gilmore when she wrote to the UK Statistics Authority, has deprecated ministers, and so has the UKSA, for pulling out unverified management information that's not validated, that we then pull out to suit ourselves, and then you don't get to see the data. So I wanted to bring some properly provided statistics which we would publish, make available to the public, that we could then have a sensible discussion about the thing that had most concerned people, which was the wait people had to get an appointment. What I can say to the committee is that the first part of the process, obviously how long claimants take to return the PIP2 form after they've collected their own, is obviously...
But you must have an average.
Well, it's obviously within their control.
It's within their control, but you must have an average.
The thing I know...
For operational reasons, you must have an average.
The thing I know what you're driving at, which is one of the things that we've had raised in the House, and I think, Chairman, you've raised it yourself, is once the assessment report is returned to the department, how long does it take Noel's decision makers to make a decision? Now, the full data will be published in the statistics we publish in March before the general election. What I can say to you today is that decision making piece that the department owns is in days, not weeks.
Can I just
yes.
I'm looking at these figures, and the average assessment clearance time, and it's with, I believe that's actually when it's with the assessment provider, it's 14 weeks now. Now, if I filled in a mortgage application form with the Nationwide, and apart from the survey, so let's say it was a remortgage, I'd probably get a decision within 2 or 3 days. 2 or 3 days. That's a commercial company, or it's a building society.
Apart from the survey.
No, let's say apart from the survey, but if you're remortgaging your own property, you get a decision of principle, etc., and it's all apart from the survey. That's 2 or 3 days. Now, they have to provide proof of income, they have to provide proof of deposit, they have to show where they've been living for a certain length of time. So it's not that dissimilar to what we're doing in a PIP claim. They have to provide an awful lot of information. Now, the motivation is to get a mortgage. The motivation for PIP is to provide money to live on. I cannot believe that our target is 16 weeks. I can't believe that we're satisfied with 14 weeks. I mean, this is people going without the means to support themselves, and we're taking 4 times as long as the Nationwide would at its most extreme and in its bad when something's gone wrong. Now, if you told someone at the Nationwide Building Society they've waited for 3 weeks for a mortgage offer when all the information was in, that person would probably have a genuine complaint and they'd get a bunch of flowers or something. And yet you're talking about 4 times as long as that is a good thing that we've
No. I was very clear. I thought I was very clear. I clearly wasn't in my response to the chairman. So, first of all, the time it takes for the department to make a decision once it has all the information, so once it has the PIP2 form, all the evidence from the claimant and the report from the assessment provider, is taking days, not weeks.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's not good enough. I'm sorry to interrupt, because the assessment provider is part of the process. Yeah. We can't separate the DWP and the settlement and say it's one, as long as the person's provided all the information they need on the form, it doesn't matter whether it's the assessment provider or with the department, that process, 14 weeks, is far too long.
No, I'm not disagreeing with you, but you cut me off before I'd finished the
well,
thought.
Like
so the point I was making, your analogy, which I'm not sure I'm entirely comfortable with, but it's your analogy, so I'll just follow it through. You said Nationwide making a decision apart from the survey. Well, the department, once it's got all the information, including taking your analogy, the survey, which is effectively the detailed assessment report based on the assessment, once it's got all that, it is making a decision in days, not weeks. You're absolutely right, though. I made it quite clear to the chairman. I don't think 16 weeks is not where I want us to remain. So we are continuing to drive performance. So I just wanted to be clear to the committee. This was my number one priority when the Prime Minister asked me to do this job and appointed me in July. And I've made that very clear. We've been working incredibly hard, not just me, but my officials and the people working in the assessment providers, to get this right for our constituents. We've continued to drive that performance, and I made it quite clear I don't want us to be content with the 14 weeks that we've achieved. I want us to improve that. What we're working on at the moment is where can we get that down to that's consistent with an efficient process. So you do need to have some work in progress, because you need to make sure, if you like, across the pipeline, that you're making sure that the assessment providers and the resources they're putting in place are working, and you don't want people sat around not doing anything. But equally, you want customers to have the best possible experience. So I want to drive that down. In parts of the country, the performance is better than this. This is the average across the country. I want to continue going further. I'm not satisfied with this level of performance, so we want to continue to improve it. So 16 weeks was the if you like, the Secretary of State last summer said in response to the debate, colleagues raised a whole load of issues, and there was a clear view, which was agreed with by the department, that this wasn't working properly. And his ambition was to make sure this was working properly. So as we exited last year and came into this year, if someone applies for PIP now, I think they will get a good experience, which is what we want them to have. But I want to continue improving it, and the department is absolutely focused on doing so.
Could you find out the figures for us for what is best practice? So you say some parts of the country it's a lot better than others. So if we could find out what is the best, what's doing the best, then that could be surely the target, the next interim target, to get everyone up to the best.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't disagree with you. I want to make sure...
if we can find out what that figure is, it'll be very interesting.
I want to make sure we're delivering a really excellent service for people applying for this. It's an important benefit. You're quite right. Although it's for dealing with the extra costs of disability. It's not for, just to be clear, it's not for dealing with people who are out of work as a result of their health condition or disability. There are other benefits that deal with that, but it's important for people. And I know, and I've said in the House, there's a real issue for people in terms of cash flow. Even though we backdate the payment, there's a real issue for people when it's taking too long. The solution is to get it working more quickly. I think the point I'm trying to land with the committee is we've made a lot of progress compared to where we were in the unacceptable period last summer, but I'm not satisfied with where we are, and it continues to be my top priority, and we'll continue to drive that performance. I hope that sense of urgency in trying to get that done is clear to the committee.
We're very interested in the figures for the best and the worst. You don't have to identify them by region or office. I'd just like to know what the figures are for the best offices, where they're doing the best. And
I'll try and share with...
Then we could say, well, that's a reasonable interim...
Well, I'll try and share with the committee. One of the things we're working through at the moment, perhaps I can write to you, Chairman, after the committee and just give you an idea about when we would be in a position, I think, to set out what our new ambition is. Because what I'm conscious of, I want to get this right. I want to set a challenging target for the department, because I want to try and really push that level of customer service. But equally, what I don't want to do is set a target, promise something to people, and then not deliver on it. I think one of the things I think politicians should try to do is be ambitious and set challenging targets to deliver good service to our constituents, but we should also be straight with people and say what we're going to do and then do it, and not overcook it and then not deliver on it. So it's trying to get that balance right. But perhaps if I set out for the committee when I think we would be in a position to set out that ambition, and then obviously we can exchange correspondence on that in due course.
Where you are right is that the claimants all the time they're waiting are incurring costs. That's why they qualify for the benefit and PIP in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got Nigel and then Sheila.
I guess I've got 3 questions, Mark. I mean, I say, this is obviously showing a great improvement on where we were in the summer, and you now look like you're hitting the 16-week thing. So that is, I guess, what we were all hoping to see today. Is there a difference between Atos and Capita in this performance?
I think, picking up the point I made to Mr Thornton, that the speed that we've got this going has been different. I think, yes, Capita has performed more quickly, but Atos also, in every region of the country, we're clearing more cases than are coming in, so we're eating through the backlog. But I think it would be fair to say Capita have moved more quickly than Atos. But Atos has made huge strides as well. So I think actually both of the assessment providers and have put a lot of work in place. I don't know, Mr Mills or Chairman, if it's helpful to the committee. I mean, I'm very happy if you want to just have a sense of what we've done and what the assessment providers have done to improve the performance. I'm very happy to ask Noel to set that out briefly for you, but entirely up to you. So I didn't do that when we were going through the...
Any information you can provide it is fine, but we've still got questions to ask.
Sure, no, of course.
So shall I just give you sort of a quick overview of the work that we've done with both providers, and I say both providers. So we worked very hard.
Can we just actually, we've got the statistics in front of us and things, and we appreciate, yes, you have improved. We've seen that from the statistics, but can we ask the specific questions rather than
sure, okay.
We've got a lot to get through this morning.
That's
we've not just got PIP, we've got also CSE as well.
That's right, leave it.
I mean, you're running at roughly 20,000 more assessments being completed than new claims a month now, aren't you? I mean, presumably that will clear the backlog down to something in 2 or 3 more months, down to where you think it's the reasonable target. I mean, I guess you have to come to a view on how long you're prepared to keep paying in the department and in the providers for a volume, a capacity much higher than your volume. I mean, is that something you're planning now to see?
Well, I think the point that we're obviously working through, which is why we need to do this carefully, is that the committee will be familiar with the fact these are obviously new claims. We've obviously got what is not very helpfully, I think, called natural reassessment, which is taking place, which is where you've got people with a time-limited DLA claim, where those are reassessed for PIP. And the committee will know that we've been switching that process on in a careful way. So the 2 tranches that I've done, we've switched that on in a careful way in areas where we know we have the capacity to deal with it. The thing that we haven't done yet, which is clearly going to require a lot of capacity, is what's, again, not terribly helpfully called managed reassessment, which is where you've got people with indefinite DLA awards, which we've said we'll start, that process will start this autumn. That obviously is quite a considerable number of claims, and that will obviously require a lot of capacity. So part of what we're doing here is building that capacity, driving down the performance, the waiting time for new claims, but also conscious that we need to make sure that capacity is in place as we then reassess existing DLA claimants and make sure that we do that in a way that is tied to the capacity, because what we don't want to do obviously is to reassess people and then have them wait for a considerable period. So we want to make sure that works well. So it's balancing those.
It's not a case of throwing resource to fix a problem and then moving the resource to go and fix a different problem. This is a proper build-up of capacity that you sustain.
Yes, what's happened here is that the capacity in the system, particularly the capacity of the assessment providers, didn't come on stream, wasn't put in place quickly enough to take account of the cases coming in the system. So as I said when I was running through the numbers with the chair, if you look at the gap between what we were clearing and what was being referred to the providers, in the early part of this the providers simply didn't have the capacity. I mean, just interesting, the last 6 months of last year, we cleared double the number of cases than we did in the 14 months before that. So, there's been a real step change in the capacity in the providers. That just didn't happen quickly enough. So it was more of it's not a case of throwing resource at it, dealing with a problem and then taking the resource away. It's a case of getting the resource that should have been there that just didn't get there quickly enough, and I think that's where we put that real focus on making this happen.
Slightly separate matter, we're using median data here. Now, there is a risk, of course, that once someone goes past 16 weeks, you leave them forever because they've missed the target, and it doesn't then matter. I mean, what's the longest wait looking like now? I mean, are you doing that?
Sorry.
Target management, or are we actually trying to get everyone through as quickly as we can get them through?
No, you're absolutely right to say, and I think I said this when I gave evidence at the committee last year, you've got to be very careful with targets to make sure you don't drive perverse incentives. So what we do across the department and what we do here is you need to look at two pieces of data. You need to look at the clearance time, which is what I've set out here, but the other thing you have to do, and we've set out the outstanding claims here, but you also have to look to make sure that if you're not clearing it in that period of time, you want to make sure there's not an incentive to just not worry about it, which is why we've got the outstanding numbers here as well. So you're right, you have to look at both of those, because otherwise if you only measure the clearance time, you would be setting up an incentive to not worry about people once they had missed that. And we've been very clear here, we've been clearing the oldest cases first, and we've been making sure that we worry about them, even if they miss the aim, we still want to get them through the system so that we don't leave anybody waiting. So you're quite right to flag that up as a concern, and the department, I think, because of its other businesses, knows that you need to measure both of those things, otherwise you can have that perverse incentive. You're quite right.
I've got Sheila, Glenda and then David.
I actually wanted to ask a different question about these statistics. And back in 2010, this whole process was set off on the basis that there were apparently and allegedly too many people in receipt of DLA, that this had to be cut back for both financial reasons and, it was said, sort of numbers reasons. I noticed that 49% of these claims under the normal rules are receiving PIP. We were given statistics previously when we were discussing this at the outset that 50% of DLA applications were successful. Are you making any effort to look at these outcomes and to see if this whole process is actually justified? It has upset people, it has distressed people, it has worried people, it has put people through delays which could have been predicted. This didn't just happen by itself. If there weren't enough resources built in at the beginning, that I have to say is a DWP's responsibility. But is there any effort to see, are there going to be overall savings out of this? Or if actually the same number of people are receiving PIP as previously received DLA, has this whole process, is it likely to make any savings?
No, I think the process has been necessary. If you go back over the DLA spending, it had gone up by a half over the last decade. It was up over a quarter in real terms before PIP was introduced. If you look at the...
But Minister, we interrogated two of your predecessors on that. A lot of that was demographics, and the fact that once you're on DLA before state pension age, then you stay on it, and people are living longer, and people with disabilities are living longer. So the actual increase was less than 8% that you couldn't be accounted for in terms of demographics. So it's not quite what... Well, no,
but Ms Gilmore was just asking me a question about has there been a difference. So if you look now at the forecast over the both what's happened already since we introduced PIP, and if you look at the forecast in the OBR, the combined DLA and PIP spend forecast is expected to be broadly flat. So I think we have dealt with the
Well, it's
growth.
expected to be broadly flat, but if the rate of successful application is actually... because the figures we were given before, we were told there would be 20% fewer people getting PIP. And that was what alarmed people, because they began to think, am I going to be in the 20%? What's happening here? 20% is quite a lot. It's a fifth less. But actually, are these predictions that you've made before, even about a flat rate, actually sustainable? It may be that this is I'm not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just trying to get my head around why it was necessary to go through all this process if in fact the end result is not going to be very much different from where we started from.
The forecasts that I mentioned that were in the autumn statement, of course, they're not our forecast. They're the OBR's forecast. So the
Based
OBR,
on presumably information you give them.
of course, but the OBR, as you'll know, doesn't just take what the government gives them at face value. I mean, it tests and asks questions and probes, and has to make a judgment as well about the reasonableness of what the government thinks. So the OBR's judgment in those forecasts is that it thinks that the spend on DLA and PIP over that period will be broadly flat. So they're not our numbers; those are the OBR's numbers. So you can argue about them, and you can say you don't believe them and you think they'll be different. But I mean, those are the numbers that the OBR has signed off for the autumn statement.
To see is there any comparative being done? Because when we were discussing ESE even 3, 4, 5 years ago, one of the difficulties we encountered as a committee was that when we asked for figures on incapacity benefit and, you know, how many people under the previous testing system were granted benefit or not granted benefit, and, you know, was it actually worse, better, so on, we were told that that information wasn't available, so we had never been able to see any clear comparison between ESE and incapacity. Is that being done in any meaningful way for this new benefit?
In terms of looking at what the policy intent compared to the outcome?
Policy intent compared to the outcome and the comparison with the predecessor benefit.
Well, we do look at the policy intent compared to the benefit. I mean, one of the problems we've had, which I'm not blaming it, it's our fault because we haven't processed enough claims. I mean, up until relatively recently, we hadn't actually had enough volume go through the system to be able to draw sensible conclusions. So now that we've done that, we will analyse those and see if the claims are coming out compared to what we'd expected and the policy intent. You'll know, of course, one of the things for PIP, it was about making sure the benefit was more accurate. So in other words, PIP is better, I think, people accept, and the way it was designed to deal with those things that DLA didn't do. So things like mental health problems, cognitive impairments, the things that DLA didn't really deal with very well, and PIP was focused at helping those people with the most severe needs. So I think that's what we've intended to do. That's what I think is happening. But of course we will keep that and look to see if the policy intent is being delivered through the assessment. As I say, one of the problems up until relatively recently, in terms of, you can see from my remark to Mr Mills, we've done more clearances of cases, more decisions made in the last 6 months than in the previous 14 months of the benefit. So because we've really put that capacity in the system, we've got enough decisions, I think, you can start drawing some meaningful conclusions. And I don't think that was really possible at the beginning of the process, because you simply hadn't had enough claims go through the system. So I think I've set out where we think the spendings will be, and I think that's dealt with the significant growth that we'd seen in the past. And obviously we'll keep that under close review. We'll do that, and I'm sure others will as well, and I'm sure this committee will play an important part in doing that.
And you will compare with the past then, because, I mean, you can't say more people with mental health conditions are getting a benefit unless you've got a comparator to base that on. It's just a statement or an assertion.
Yeah, no, all I said, I didn't say that. What I said was that PIP, the design of PIP was specifically to make sure that you also captured some of those health conditions and disabilities that weren't well dealt with DLA. And I think my understanding of the process of designing it was that a lot of work went into making sure it dealt with things like mental health problems, fluctuating conditions, cognitive impairments, the sorts of things that weren't well dealt with under DLA. I think I've accurately characterised how it was, how the design was undertaken.
But isn't the problem that when the Treasury and the OBR came up with their figures about how much the move from DLA to PIP would save, they couldn't possibly know, simply because at that stage the descriptors hadn't been written and the criteria of who would get and who wouldn't get the new benefit hadn't been drawn up. So there was, apart from a very crude calculation that because the lower level DLA care was disappearing, that somehow that would all be saved. But of course some of the people sitting in lower rate care DLA might qualify for the standard or indeed the enhanced PIP because for the reasons you've given. So it was very much a guesstimate of savings. And as Sheila says, that frightened people. But I think what we're asking for now is you now are in a position to actually, you've now had the volume through to work out whether there are more people getting PIP, which might be possible, because the way the criteria have been written and the descriptors have been written, or fewer, and there you would, that way you'd be able to get much more robust figures as to whether the introduction of this benefit will actually save the government money, or will be cost neutral, or indeed will cost the government more money, and actually might be more generous than previous benefits.
Well, I think that, well, there's two things. I mean, clearly we will look and do look at the performance of the benefit, and as I said, in terms of the forecasts that are inside the welfare cap that were set out at the autumn statement, those are of course tested by the OBR. They look at actual performance and what we're expecting to happen and so forth, and those are obviously all published for everybody to see. I think the difficulty is trying to do the comparator with what would have happened if DLA had carried on happening, because it's quite hard to say, to take all of the decisions we're making on PIP and say, well, what would have happened to all of those cases under a different benefit that didn't deal well with certain health conditions and disabilities, and then compare the two. And when
you must be able to extrapolate that, because one of the things that we way back, I think when Maria Moore was the minister, and when we looked at this initially, a lot of the aspirations for PIP could have been achieved through reforming DLA. You know, a lot of the face-to-face assessments, the changing the descriptors, those kind of things, could have been achieved with DLA. But the government chose instead to bring in a new benefit. And I think what we're trying to get is what has been, can we quantify in monetary terms, what it means for the government to bring in the new benefit, because we know that by bringing in a new benefit it's caused a great deal of fear and alarm on existing claimants. You know, and in order to be able to balance those two things, was it worth all this upheaval for existing claimants? Do they end up with a better outcome as a result, and rather than they would have done by just reforming DLA, for instance?
Well, I'm not quite sure. If you reform DLA to introduce face-to-face assessments and then reform it so that it took account of the things it didn't take account of very well, I'm not quite sure that that's enormously different than introducing a new benefit that does all those things.
Yes, but no, the difference is that people knew DLA, trusted DLA, were on DLA, and I think we'd have understood why perhaps they needed to have an updated assessment, whereas the whole atmosphere was poisoned perhaps in the minds of many disabled people, because they thought that the reason the government was introducing the new benefit was to take their money away from them. And that's been the problem that's made it more difficult for you as a minister to actually get people to accept that this is the right thing to do.
Well, that may have been how some people characterised
yes,
what we were doing. Yes, but
that's why I'm asking you to respond.
But I don't think it was a fair characterisation, because of course we're not. I mean, this is the point I was making when I was trying to say about savings. Of course, you know, what I think we've done is we've dealt with what I think was unsustainable growth in spending, but of course we haven't actually reduced what we're spending. So what we're arguing about is if someone wants to pretend we've cut something, well, we've cut the rate of growth, but we haven't actually cut what we're spending, because, as I said, the combined DLA and PIP spend forecast over the 6 years that the benefit will have been in existence to the end of the spending review period will be broadly flat. So, I mean, it kind of depends how you want to characterise it. I mean, I think it's dealt with keeping the spending sustainable, which I think means that you can actually then reassure people who get the benefit that there's a sustainable benefit that is affordable for the taxpayer. You know, you can see from the forecast we've set out and that the OBR validated in the autumn statement that for the range of benefits for ESA and for PIP and DLA together, we're within the welfare cap, so it's a sustainable benefit system. I mean, actually, you don't reassure people if you have a system which looks like it's going to become unaffordable at some point in the future. Then people will worry about what you're going to have to do. So I think having a system which is sustainable, and I know how valuable PIP is to enable people to be independent, to be able to work, to be able to have independent lives. I think having a sustainable system is a very good way of being able to reassure people that benefit is in place.
Okay, I've got Glenda and Debbie.
Thank you, Chair. I've got two. The first one is Have you produced statistics? I'm sorry, my eyes and my glasses aren't good enough to manage this very small print of the statistics you furnished us with today, on people who are actually waiting a great deal longer than 16 weeks for their PIP assessment. I mean, the Disability Benefits Consortium has said that there are a significant number of claimants who have waited not only longer than 6 months, but for longer than a year, and that obviously has a knock-on effect upon the whole family. And the second question is, you keep on and on about driving the time. Evidence has been presented to the department, certainly has been presented to this committee, that the actual process itself is not fit for purpose. So what are you doing to change that? It's not simply a matter of assessors. We've all heard about the endless forms that have to be filled in, a completely lamentable appointment system where an individual, because of their specific illness, either can't answer a phone or they don't receive the envelope. So it's not simply a question of time, and it isn't simply a question of the number of people employed to assess. It is the actual assessment process itself. So what is being done to improve that and make it fit for purpose?
Okay, so let me take your first point that you made about people that have waited a long time. No, I make no bones about it. People have waited, and as I said, this really came to the fore last summer. There have been people in the past that have waited a great deal of time for getting their assessment and then their decision for the benefit. That is unacceptable. I've been very clear about that in my answer to Mr. Thornton. I want people that apply for this benefit to have a good experience in doing so. They should get their form, they should be able to collect their evidence, we should give them clear information about what they need to send in, and then when they send it back, we should refer them to if they need a face-to-face assessment. And of course, one of the things we're doing is trying to make sure that if we've got enough evidence on paper, some of these decisions are able to be made without having to call someone in for a face-to-face assessment if the position is clear. But if they have to come in for a face-to-face assessment, they shouldn't have to wait a long time for that, and then we should make a swift decision. So that's the ambition. But I don't resolve from the fact there have been people who've had a very poor experience. We all know we've had in our own constituencies, and I've had to write letters back to colleagues where, although someone may have now had the assessment and a decision, if you look at the length of time they've had to wait, it's been not acceptable. And I make no bones about that. That's why I've been putting so much effort into this, and it has a real impact.
The point that I was attempting to make here is that there's surely been sufficient experience over the period of time that PIP has been introduced to show where it doesn't work, where the actual process is inadequate.
Right. So I dealt with your first question, which is about time. Let me just deal with the process. So I don't think I would agree with your characterisation of the process, absolutely except for the time people have waited. That's not been acceptable. But I think if you look at and I'm not sure whether you're going to ask questions about this, but if you look at Paul Gray's independent review, he took a great deal of evidence and spoke to a lot of people. My reading of his report isn't that the experience of people, once they had the assessment, I absolutely accept that the experience people have had waiting for it has not been great, but actually the evidence when people have had an assessment, I'm not pretending there aren't any individual examples of problems, but I don't think you can characterise the process as one that isn't largely working. Are there things we can do to make it better? Yes, there are. And Paul Gray sets out in his report a number of short-term, medium-term and longer-term things that we can do to improve that. And we'll be responding to his report in due course to set out our response to those things. Some of those things are things we're working on already in terms of better communication to customers so they know what evidence they have to produce. We now confirm to them when we get the form back so that they know we've had it, because we had issues at the beginning where people sent their forms back, we didn't get the form, but we didn't know, or they didn't know that, and they would wait a long time, and then they'd make inquiries and discover that the form had disappeared. So we communicate with them now. There are things we can do to make it better, and we're going to do that, and Paul Gray's made a number of recommendations. But I don't think the characterisation that you put on it is one that's borne out by his report or the evidence. But I accept, of course, there will be individual cases, but I don't think the experience of people generally, once they've had the assessment, is a poor one.
Well, we'll have to agree to differ on that.
Yeah, I think, Debbie, did you have
Yes, just a very brief one. You mentioned right at the beginning, Minister, that there's a 26% attrition rate. In other words, in terms of people who've withdrawn, had a claim disallowed, or, as the Chair mentioned, have died. How does that compare to DLA?
I don't know. I don't have those statistics in front of me. I will have a look, and I'll also have to write to the committee.
Before we leave the statistics, can we just, to get on the record, the terminal illness ones, because I think that's generally a good news story as well. Well, although in October it was down to 6 days and it's gone back up to 7, I don't know, but I don't want to be churlish about that, because we have managed to drive that down.
The reason why I put that in, Chairman, was just because I know that there had been an issue with this in the autumn of 2013, and I know my predecessor, this was one of the areas he'd focused on, and working with Macmillan put a process in place here, and it was really just to confirm for the committee now that if you qualify under the special rules for terminal illness, so where your prognosis is that you have less than 6 months to live, we've put this process in place, and it was just to say that we're delivering the 7 working days which had been my predecessor's ambition, consistently, and I think that process is working, and it's really important, obviously, because for people with that short prognosis, obviously you don't want them waiting, and I think that process is largely working. I know there's an issue for people who have health conditions where they are terminal, but it's longer than that 6 months.
You were just anticipating my next question, whether you made any progress for those who don't have a terminal diagnosis but got a rapidly progressive illness.
Yes,
I was
so
to people with NMND last night, and that's a real concern for them.
Well, this is an important issue, and it came up in the Westminster Hall debate that Ms Pearce secured last week, I think it was, from I think colleagues in Scotland, where there's been a particularly prominent case. And as I said there, I think the way to solve that problem is to make sure that people with longer prognosis are not having to wait a long time. So I think the way to solve that problem is to make sure that the experience of those people in the normal rules is that they're having a good experience and not having to wait excessive periods of time. I didn't try and hide from the fact that the current process or the waits that people will have had last year are unacceptable, but I don't think you want to set up another special process. You want to get the main process working properly.
What's suggested, as I say, we met people from the Motor Neuron Disease Association yesterday, and what they would like is some form of triaging, that certain conditions like motor neuron disease, like Huntington's disease, acted as a trigger to put them to the top of the pile. And so some way of triaging them to make sure that they are not waiting 4 months for an assessment, because in that time they could have deteriorated very, very rapidly. And one of the main things that they're concerned about is by the time people get assessed, get the money and everything, they're actually assessed for something that happened 6 months ago, and they're not, their condition has progressed so much.
No,
it has to be something that you have to do, Minister.
Well, I recognise that. I think the problem with trying to triage cases by condition is if you're from an organisation that's concerned about a particular condition, I can see why that sounds very compelling. If you're sitting on this side of the table, I think the problem would be that each of those groups would make a case for the particular condition that they have an interest in. So, we get the same arguments for people for various sorts of cancer. And then by the time you've finished, you can't triage and accelerate everybody, because if you do that, you're not actually speeding up the cases for anybody. So I think the way you have to deal with it is to make you clearly, for someone who has a very short prognosis, which we've set at 6 months for the special rules for terminal illnesses, you do have to have a process which is different, because it's absolutely critical in those cases that you get that support to people very, very fast. But in other cases, I think the way you have to deal with it is to get the main process working properly.
Can I just ask about paper-based? Is it if someone has got the letter that shows that they're very clearly quite disabled now, and it's their first application, that's likely to be done as paper-based. Well, would it still take that 16 weeks? Well, when it's paper-based.
Well, I was just going to say. So what I was going to say was for some conditions, of course, where the evidence that you can supply on paper is very clear. If you can make the decision on paper, that will be much quicker. Now, one of the problems we had last year, which will have been true, is that because we had a backlog, because the providers didn't have the capacity, they weren't even looking. We were referring cases to them, and there was a delay before they even looked at cases. Now that we've got a position where they have the capacity, because they're looking at cases much more quickly, those where they're making that decision about can they make a decision on the paper, on the evidence they have in front of them, or do they need to call someone in for an assessment, that process now happens on a much more timely basis. So I think the way you deal with conditions where there's a clear diagnosis, that has some inevitable consequences. If those decisions can be taken on paper, then it's absolutely in our interest to do so. We don't want to call people in for unnecessary assessments. So I think the solution in those cases, in many cases, will be the decisions can be taken on paper without having to call someone in for an assessment, and that will be much quicker. But that wasn't working properly either because of the capacity problems with the assessment providers. And I said that I think will get a lot better because of that capacity issue.
Appreciate that. I've got some questions now from Belinda.
Thank you, Chair. We're still on the process, I think, essentially here. I mean, last September, Mr. Shanahan told us that the providers had realised that home visits were half as productive, I'm quoting, as requiring claimants to attend assessment centres, and this was part of a voyage of discovery that providers were on at that time to find the ideal delivery model. Surely that's hard evidence that the PIP assessment should have been properly trialled before it was implemented. I go back to the points that I make. It's actually the process.
Well,
and you are forgive me for interrupting you, but sorry, you are on the brink of rolling out this whole process nationwide. If it isn't working now, what's the future going to hold?
Well, I think it is working now. I mean,
it clearly isn't, Minister.
Well, it clearly wasn't. I'm not, and I've been very clear about that. It wasn't working. You can see from the data and our own experiences. Last summer when this issue came to the fore in the exchanges in the Commons, you can see actually in a way the statistics demonstrate that the feedback that we will have been getting from our constituents was in line with that. That was the period at which this process simply wasn't working. And that was why the Secretary of State set out the ambition to fix it and get it working. And as these things happen with the reshuffle, when the Prime Minister asked me to do this job, and he said this was the top priority for me to sort out, and I've said that consistently since, and it has been, and I think we've made considerable progress. Do we still need to keep improving the process? Yes, we do, and I'm not resigning from the fact there have been a lot of issues. You will still have people who are sort of, that is their experience, but I think people now applying for this benefit will see a really much improved process. Can we continue improving it? Yes, we can. And the point that Noel made about how the providers were delivering this, they have made real progress here, both in terms of how they deliver it, how they deal with customers, how they put capacity in place in the various locations they need to in terms of assessment centres, and that getting that balance between home visits. So it is fair to say one of the providers thought that more home visits, not just in those cases where people needed one, was a way of doing it. And I don't think that's proved to be as efficient a way of delivering it. So home visits are obviously still available for people where their disability or health condition necessitates it, but you do get a more efficient process if people come to an assessment centre and are seen like that. You use your skilled staff more efficiently.
I have 2 cases in my constituency that arrived last week. There are no appointments available for claimants who live in northwest London within their own area. They are in one instance having to travel to Ilford, in another they're having to travel far down over the south of the Thames. So clearly there has been no improvement there. This is simply not acceptable to someone who has applied for PIP. And again, I mean, we were told last time that there'd been no big shift in the balance between home visits and assessment centres. You're now saying to us that the situation there, I think I understood you correctly, has improved. I have direct evidence that it hasn't. So, you know, what's going to improve there?
Well, Atos, for example, have opened. They've opened another 20 centres. They've got a number scheduled. So last autumn, for example, they opened a further centre in Edinburgh, in Ms Gilmore's area. I think Chairman there is scheduled to open another centre in Aberdeen, and in Blackpool another one in the summer in Mr Maynard. And I see Mr Maynard is nodding at that. So they are putting that capacity in place. And I've been frank with the committee. Did that happen fast enough? No, it didn't. It didn't keep pace with the work coming in, which is why that backlog built up. Was that acceptable for customers? No, it wasn't, and I've been very clear about that. But the providers we've been pushing them. They've responded. They're putting that capacity in place so that your constituents and my constituents have a better experience and get appointments more quickly. And have the sort of experience we would want them to have in the process. So these new assessment centres are meeting a specific need in a specific area, are they? They are not part and parcel of the national rollout. And will you have ensured that in all these new assessment centres they are accessible to everyone? Because that clearly was not the experience when this whole process was first introduced. Yeah, so the capacity has been put in place so that across the country you will have the right capacity in the right places. Providers will still look to provide home appointments for someone who simply isn't able to attend an assessment centre because of the nature of their health condition or disability. But we're making sure we put the capacity in place so that when we then start managed reassessment for that stock of DLA claimants, we've got the capacity in place, and we won't switch that on and we won't roll that out where we don't have the capacity. So we're not going to end up shooting ourselves in the foot by not learning the lessons that we've learnt over the last year, 6 months. So, I mean, that capacity is going in place, will be in place, so that we can make sure customers get a good experience. I want your constituents to have a good experience when they apply for PIP, so that they get a timely appointment, they can go to the assessment, they can have that assessment, the report goes back to the department, and then they have a quick decision. And they have that good experience. That's your ambition, and that's my ambition that we share. But my constituents' experience, or rather the experience of all PIP claimants at the moment in North West London, that they cannot be assessed within their own area. They are having to travel long distances at ridiculous hours of the day, is not limited to North West London or indeed London. So how are you going to pick up that backlog in the process of rolling out additional assessment centres? Is there going to be money thrown at it, or is money being taken away from the existing assessment areas to facilitate the opening of new assessment centres? So the point you raised there is about what should a reasonable expectation be for the travel distances to assessment centres. So the department said that no one should have to travel for more than 90 minutes on public transport to an assessment centre. And so that's obviously used for planning where you get assessments and where you have to locate assessment centres. And it's getting that balance right between how much capacity you put in place, where you put it, and how that relates to where the claims are coming in. So that's what we set out as an expectation for claimants, and that's what providers are having to work within, so that's a maximum. In many cases it's less, but that's the maximum expectation that someone would have to travel by public transport. But that was set out at the beginning of the process, the 90 minutes on public transport. For many people on PIP, travel on public transport is virtually impossible. But I'm talking about a situation now where this, for the first time in North West London, PIP claimants cannot be assessed within their own area. They are having to travel further. Now, so what I'm saying to you is why it seems that the system, far from improving, is deteriorating. Well, no, I don't. Well, I suppose one of the arguments is about how far. It comes down to how far you think someone should have to travel. I mean, I think in the cases you said... Well, I certainly don't think someone who lives in Hampstead should have to go to Ilford in Essex when they are making a claim based on their physical or mental impairments. Well, so when they've got no money. So we've set out the expectations for travel that we think are reasonable. I mean, I think I should just say, by the way, that we obviously set them out in terms of public transport. The vast majority of people actually come to assessments by car. But we've set that out. I mean, you can argue about whether you think that's reasonable. I mean, clearly, you cannot deliver a system so that everybody can go to an assessment centre that's within 5 minutes of their house, just to take it to an extreme. So there's a balance. So there's a balance. We've set out...
I was going to say, Minister, just to move this along,
sure.
Perhaps you could look at the specific problems in North London and get back to Ms Jackson. That would be useful. Because obviously this is we're getting into specifics now.
Sure,
but I think Paul wants to come in on
that,
so I'm going to bring Paul in.
Well, just very simple yes or no, and then a medium-sized question. But can you confirm that individual members of Parliament have made representations to the providers to open assessment centres in their local areas where there has been no assessment centre, such as in Blackpool? Yes or no?
Yes, they have.
Thank you. Right, medium-sized question. When we can't criticise performance, it seems to be a sort of trade to select committees to go back to criticising policy intent, as seems to be occurring today. Can you remind the committee, as it were, that one of the key points of PIP is it is meant to assess individual functionality and not assessed by medical condition? Would you have a concern if we were to start triaging by condition, because that would reintroduce medicalisation of the process when it should be about individual functionality? And what perverse outcomes do you think would flow between conditions with a broad spectrum of severity, where the simple diagnosis of, say, cerebral palsy has a multiple range of outcomes, and a very narrow range that might be, say, cystic fibrosis or multineuron disease? Would there not be perverse consequences if we started to triage again by the label round our neck?
Well, I think on the point about that, I mean, I think I answered that briefly in my response to the chair. I mean, you're absolutely right. The whole point about PIP is it's supposed to be about looking at not what health condition or disability somebody has, but the impact that has on their ability to be independent, as is suggested by the name of the benefit, personal independence payment. And it's to make sure we assess that on paper if you have got sufficient information, but for a lot of people you have to have that assessment to just look at the impact of your ability to do things that enable you to live independently. So the problem with triaging based on condition, I think there's two things. First of all, as you say, the fact that you have a particular condition, there will often be a broad range of the impact that has on your life that you can't get from the diagnosis. But also, I think the other problem is that I see lots of requests from a range of organisations that want us to treat things based on condition. Now, if you look at it narrowly, based on one condition, I can see that makes a lot of sense. But the problem is, if we did that, lots of organisations would say that, and you simply can't do that. Now, I think where you've got cases where perhaps there's a very narrow span of impact from the condition, those will be cases which will be able to be, in lots of cases, decided on the paperwork. If someone has a diagnosis of a particular condition and that has some very specific consequences for them and their ability to live independently, and it follows that is true, then those will be cases, not probably in every case, but largely where you can make decisions based on the paper without having to have somebody come in for an assessment. But if we go back to saying it's based on condition, I just don't think that's possible. And certainly with a lot of conditions like, for example, mental health problems, the range of the impact that a mental health problem will have from a common mental health problem to a very severe one is not possible to assess just from a straight diagnosis. You have to look at the impact it has on somebody. So I think you're right to draw that out for the committee.
Essentially, we've moved from centres to actual face-to-face assessments. I mean, can you tell us what percentage of claimants have been required to attend a face-to-face assessment in the last period for which you have the figures? And does this percentage include special rules claims where no face-to-face assessment is required?
I don't have in front of me the split between paper and face-to-face. Yeah. I'll write to the committee with that information. But we split, just to be clear, we split that out so that we don't bias it by putting the special rules, because as you correctly say, the vast majority of special rules cases do not have to have an assessment. We make that decision based on the diagnosis of their terminal illness.
Well, that was going to be my next.
So that's why we split those out, so that you don't artificially inflate the figure for normal rules cases. So I will get the paper-based assessment information for normal rules cases, and I'll set that out for the committee in writing.
That's useful, because the last time you said it was going to be in the official statistics due out the following week in September, but it wasn't. So if you can supply us with that, that would be
okay.
That would be
sorry,
I was just going to move on.
I was just going to say, will that also include a percentage just related to the normal rules? So that we'll get the two, if you see what you mean.
Yes, yeah, because if you stick the two together, the number would be artificially skewed by the special rules. So it'll be for normal rules cases, and so that you can see that
what the special rules.
Thank you. Nigel, I think we've probably touched on most of the other questions to come, but hopefully my colleagues will be able to home in the bits we haven't asked.
PIP, of course, wasn't the only issue in the summer. There was also the problems with delays for DLA for under 16s. Is that something you can update us on, whether those have been sorted out now?
Yes, I can, and I know that the Permanent Secretary confirmed that there were some issues there. I'm pleased to say that those issues have been resolved. I visited the centre in Birmingham where we run this operation a short while ago and spoke to the manager there, took me through the process. So we've dealt with those. I mean, just in brief, for the committee's benefit, there were some issues last summer in July with changes to how some of the processes worked in terms of the mail opening and scanning processes. That generated some difficulties with registering claims, which generated some backlogs, and we've put in place some additional staff. We've improved the productivity of our people and improved some of the processes, and we've actually got to the point now we've made significant progress. We've got the average clearance time is now back down to the target by the end of this month, so very shortly, and we want to make sure that sustained performance is reflected. So you were right to highlight that there was an issue. The issue was jumped on quickly, and it's been resolved. So families with children claiming DLA should find that their experience now is the one we would expect them to have. Just picking up the point about expectations, which Mr. Thornton raised earlier, the current target for DLA for children is 79% of cases cleared in 40 working days, which I have to say I don't think is a very helpful target, because as I said in my answer to the chairman, the reason what we normally set targets something like 95% of cases in a certain period of time, so that basically says if your case is not particularly complex, it's not something out of the ordinary, you kind of know how long it's going to take. The problem with a target of 79% is there will be people applying will think, am I in the fifth that's going to take longer? So one of the things that Noel's tasked his people with working out is, if we want to give people a proper expectation, so anyone will know if they've got a reasonably straightforward case, how long are we going to wait? What is that number? So we'll be able to lay it out in terms of 95% of people will expect the decision in what period of time. So I think we have an ambition to be able to set out a more ambitious and more meaningful target that we can then hit. Because the current one, we are now hitting it, but I don't think it helps particularly when you're applying for a benefit if you only know that 4/5 of people get it in a particular period of time, because you don't really know whether you're going to be in the 4/5 or the 1/5 that doesn't. So I think that's in good shape. If you want more detail, Noel can set that out, but I think basically there was a problem, it's sorted in short.
40 working days is an 8-week target. I mean, 95% in 12 weeks wouldn't be much progress, would it? I mean, that's why I guess you don't want to be falling too far back from that.
Well, I'm not going to make one up now, but I mean, again, I agree with you. I want to challenge the department to be ambitious in terms of what it can do, to reflect that, people have to wait, a reasonable period of time, picking up the point Mr. Thornton. I want to be ambitious about that, but equally I want to set out targets that we can deliver for people. You don't give people favours if you make them wait too long, but you also aren't doing them any favours if you get ahead of yourself. So
these
I want
problems,
to keep that tension on the department.
I think we get that, but these problems weren't resourcing or greater applicants. These were just somehow forgetting to open the post or scan it or something? I mean,
No, there was some process issues. Some of it was to do with one of the issues was around something that doesn't sound very like it would be a problem, to do with not having national insurance numbers scanned in, and the cases not being linked up to records properly. And it was a process issue. It wasn't a resourcing issue. It was just the process didn't work properly, because we made some process changes to the IT system, and that caused some unforeseen problems in the process.
Was that
so? I think it was very much in the if you're going to divide things up into, I think it was sort of the cock up rather than conspiracy sort of problem.
I suppose
and it's been fixed.
Without labouring, I mean, how quickly was it spotted that the process wasn't working? Presumably you'd think, we're quite a lot of numbers down on new claims this month, what's going on? But it seemed to drag on.
Well, certainly once I was made aware of the problem, which I think from memory, I was made aware of the problem in November, I think. I jumped on it very quickly. And we made sure that it was dealt with. And as I said, I visited the centre to talk to the person that runs it, and to talk to some of the staff about the process and how it was working and so forth, and satisfied myself that they had a grip, had dealt with it, and were continuing to make improvements. And I think we want to continue improving that process for parents that have disabled children.
I'm hoping to wrap this bit of, because we've also got ESA in 5 minutes, but I've got Sheila and Debbie, if they can sort of work out what are their key bits that they want to take out of what they've got left to ask. So I think it was Sheila first.
Well, I mean, we have covered quite a bit of ground. I just, in relation to reassessed GLA claimants, obviously not many have been done so far. When do you anticipate the statistics, actually both on outcomes for, we discussed a little bit about this earlier, outcomes for new claims, for those reassessed claims? I mean, when do we expect to get those statistics?
So for natural reassessment, so those DLA cases that were time limited, so we obviously have done some of those. That's not been rolled out across the whole of the country, although we're continuing to do that where we have capacity. The reason why I limited this publication to new claims was because that was clearly where the real problem was that had been raised with me, because these are obviously cases where people don't have money in payment.
Statistics to
in
published?
the statistics that we've already said that we're publishing in March, which will be clearance and outstanding times, those will have, I think I'm right in saying, those will have the
and will they give us some statistics on outcomes? For example, how many people are being given awards?
I will have to check what is included in those. So it probably makes sense, Chair, if I write to the committee and set out. And we've already pre-announced that we're going to publish those. Let me see what I can share with the committee in terms of the level of detail that will be in those publications, and I'll write to the Chair.
I know that Debbie, I think, wants to ask about sort of mandatory assessment, but can I ask a question? I think it was asked at the Westminster Hall debate last week as well. The government, the opposition have all said that they want to devolve disability benefits, DLA input, to Scotland.
Yes.
That obviously won't take effect immediately. Many people feel it would be desirable not to roll out reassessment in Scotland at this stage, to give the Scottish Government, the Scottish Parliament, an opportunity to decide whether they want to change the system or not. I don't know whether they want to or not. But would it not actually be sensible simply to agree that?
Well, no, I don't think so, because you're quite right that commitments have been made about what's going to happen, and you obviously saw last week, which was obviously after the Westminster Hall, but I sort of slightly signposted it in the debate, the publication of the government's command paper and some of the draft clauses. But the fact is, the law is as it is at the moment. The UK government policy is set out in law, and
the timing of things is not in law, and the dates have already slipped. So I think what people are saying is, if you're serious about this, why not just say, okay, we won't. You've got capacity problems anyway. We won't go ahead with that, and that will enable voluntary organisations, the third sector, and the Scottish Parliament to decide. Well, they may actually decide that they don't want to change it all. I don't know what the outcome of that.
Well, the position is at the moment, the legal position is as it is. The law hasn't been changed yet, so apart would have a whole load of consequences in changing it. Also, the baseline that was set out in Smith around funding was about fiscal neutrality. So the baseline for the Scottish and UK governments when they're assessing future expenditure in Scotland is what forecast expenditure will be based on PIP being rolled out. That is the established UK government policy.
It's going to be flat anyway, so.
Yeah, so we've set out the forecast, but the forecasts are based on rolling out PIP, and that is the baseline. That is what the law says at the moment. I think because otherwise, I think you're anticipating two things. First of all, this Parliament has to change the law to devolve the powers to Scotland, but also the Scottish Government then has to decide what it wants to do. And my understanding is, I don't think, I may be being uncharitable, I don't think a great deal of thinking has happened to date.
I think,
and then
of course, the point is that people. I know a lot of thinking hasn't happened yet. I think the point is people want the space in which to have that. But I mean, I've heard your answer, and I know that Deborah's got a question.
Sorry.
So perhaps
Debbie,
we've talked a little bit in excuse me, in terms of the evaluation of PIP already, and I have to say I was slightly surprised by the response. I mean, normal good management practice would be to have an evaluation system that was designed as the policy was being developed. You haven't had any formative evaluation. You said that the numbers are the reason why this hasn't happened. But putting that to one side, what are your plans for evaluation? Can you share with us what the design thinking is for such an evaluation, and when will this happen?
Well, we will analyse now that we've got a significant number of assessments made and decisions made. Clearly, we will look at the award rates, which Ms Gilmore mentioned, and we do keep under review. Is the policy delivering in practice the policy intent as it was designed? So we do that and keep that work under review. In terms of what you're saying, is there a particular piece of work that's going to be undertaken and so forth? Let me see. And I mean, we're not doing a separate exercise to say has it or hasn't it done certain things. I mean, we keep under review the performance. I mean, in terms of producing the forecast for the Office for Budget Responsibility, they wanted to know what we were expecting to happen. Those are built into the forecast that they have signed off. So I think some of that work's underway. I mean, in order for me to give you a more helpful reply, can you be a little bit more specific about what your
unintended consequences? I think Sheila raised some very pertinent points. So an evaluation doesn't just look at what the intended consequences were, but also the unintended consequences, some of the comparative work that, again, Sheila was discussing. So I think that would be very, very helpful if you were able to provide that Minister.
Okay. Let me wrap that then into the answer, because I said I would set out for the Chair what would or wouldn't be sensible in terms of comparatives. So let me look and see what I can set out, and I can write to the committee on that basis.
Can I just move on then, in terms of the migration from DLA to PIP and the managed reassessments? Again, I understand from the debate last week that you gave an indication that the October 2015 timescale for that process to start has now slipped. So can you confirm what the new timetable might be?
No, I don't think I said it had slipped. Well, I think the point I was making was that it's not like switch it on in October and we do it everywhere all at the same time. I think the point I was trying to make, in the same way we have with natural reassessment, we'll do managed reassessment in a way that's commensurate with the capacity. So what we're not going to do to people is say that we're going to reassess their DLA claim and then start that process and then make sure they have to wait a long time for an assessment. So what we will do is we will look where we switch it on in the same way we have with natural reassessment, where we look at where we have the capacity, we'll make sure we've got the capacity in place, and then we'll do that process on a rolling basis. So the start won't change. The point I was making, it's not a sort of big bang all on day one process.
So the start
It's
will
a
still
rolling
be in
period.
October 2015.
That's the expectation, yes.
Okay. And bearing in mind all the problems that we've experienced with PIP and so on, how will you be ensuring that this is managed in an effective way?
Well, I mean, if I just give you an example, for example, what we do with the natural reassessment, because the process is similar. So what officials do is they look at where the DLA cases are, they look at where the capacity is at a postcode level, they go through that information, they make recommendations to me about where we should switch it on, and I have to be satisfied that we've got the capacity in place either now or it's going to be in place when the reassessment starts. And if I'm not satisfied, then it doesn't happen. So some of the things that are recommended to me, I'm quite robust in making sure that we don't cause problems for our constituents, and some of those recommendations are not accepted, and we only switch it on where we're confident that we can deliver it. And that is the process that we will undertake for managed reassessment. And I think you can rest assured, certainly if I think it's true of the department in terms of officials, it's certainly true in terms of ministers, I think we have learnt quite a lot about this process, and I think we're very clear that we don't want to make mistakes in the future without having learned from the experience of the past year.
Okay. Can I just follow
very quickly?
As we know, there will be winners and losers from the mandatory assessment process. So you've given indications in terms of those who are going to have adverse decisions, that how this might be handled sensitively. Can you elaborate in a bit more detail what this will involve? And my second question, this is probably the biggest, in terms of what proportion, what numbers are you anticipating would have an adverse decision? So in other words, their award would be reduced. And what assessment has been undertaken in terms of the impact of the proposed reduction in the benefit cap on those people who have a reduced award, and would they be affected as currently DLA claimants aren't affected by the benefit cap?
So going through those, so in terms of the expected change from someone who's currently getting DLA to PIP and the changes we're expecting, we have published that information. It was in the impact assessment. I don't have it in front of me, and I'm not going to recall it from my brain, because I'm sure if I do that it will be incorrect. So I will write to the committee and remind the committee what we set out in the impact assessment, because we did publish that in the impact assessment.
There have been changes both in terms of the number of people who've gone through PIP, as we've been discussing really. So
Sure.
if there are any changes to that would be very helpful.
Okay,
as
so
well.
I'll update the committee. You'll know from what we've set out, which has been a disappointment to people who've gained moving from DLA to PIP, that we did set out, because there will be people who have a lower rate, a lower award, that there is a process where there's a period of run-on for a month, which gives people some time to adjust to that. And separately, for those people who might currently be getting the higher rate of the mobility component, if they were to not get that under PIP, my understanding is the Motability organisation, which is of course independent of government, has put in place some processes to deal with people who would then not be entitled to use the Motability scheme, in terms of some lump sum payments that would enable those people to retain having a car. But I'll set that out as well in writing for the committee, if I may.
I'm going to be writing on a constituent's case, but can you also tell us if someone is on DLA, wants to move to PIP, voluntarily, because they think they'll qualify under the new assessment, whether they have to drop their DLA claim first, not in any of the managed migration, but someone who voluntarily chooses to go to PIP, do they have to drop their DLA claim in the meantime and then have that gap until they're treated as a new claim?
it's probably better if I check.
Yeah,
rather
you'll get a
than-
letter from me, but it's another of these
Because
issues.
it will depend on to do with whether they're in an area where the natural reassessment is in place and all sorts of things. So
yes, they're not, because it's Aberdeen.
yeah,
that's
I better just check the specifics of the case.
Yeah.
So if you're going to write to me about that, shall
I'll
I?
write to you as a constituency MP.
So I'll wait
but,
for the reply.
But there are these sort of issues that individuals.
And I think it is the last bit of my question, as I say, in terms of what was announced yesterday about the proposed reduction and the issues that people who are reassessed as eligible for PIP with a reduced award, would they be contained within, would they be affected by the proposed changes in the benefit?
Well, the announcement that the Prime Minister made yesterday was, of course, in his capacity as leader of the Conservative Party. It's not yet government policy. That will obviously depend on the result of the election. So obviously the government...
But there must be an assessment in terms of how this would affect, very vulnerable members of our society.
Well, that's not that. It isn't government policy, and obviously, if it were to be adopted as government policy, then obviously the usual processes would take place. That was an announcement he made in his capacity as leader of the party, in terms of setting out our proposals for the election. And the reason why he made the proposal was because I get all the time in my constituency people that still think that the benefit cap is too high, and that people who are out of work shouldn't be able to get that level of income compared to those who are in work. And I think, myself, I happen to think that change is welcome, and I think it'll be welcomed by my constituents. But I've heard your point, but I mean, that was a position set out. It's not the current government's policy.
Right, I've got Paul and then Kazi.
Thank you. The quick paragraph of the Gray Review that caused me a degree of concern revolved around the review of awards. Obviously, a PIP claim can be time limited to 1 year, whatever. At the end of that time, you are then reassessed naturally. There have been examples of people who have gone through an appeals process, then get reissued with an assessment shortly after the appeal is successful. But we now seem to have a new concept called interventions, which I confess in my ignorance I wasn't really aware of. Can you explain for me what the policy intent was behind them, the circumstances in which they are used, and most importantly perhaps the frequency of use, because it's an intriguing new development, let's put it that way.
Sure. So the point of this is to make sure that individuals' needs are reviewed at the appropriate time, and as you said, the PIP claims will be there'll be a time limit, and the review, by the way, wouldn't always involve a face-to-face assessment. Some of it might be on the paper. So the recommendation that Paul Gray had in his report, because at the moment there have been very few of these. This came up, I think Ms Pearce mentioned it I think it was in her speech in the Westminster Hall debate last week. There have been very few of them so far. One of the things that Paul Gray recommended in his report was, in the medium term, he said that we should ensure that the policy intent for reviewing awards is being met. The guidance reflects it, and decision letters explain the rationale for the timings in individual cases. And he also, by the way, said we shouldn't use the term intervention because it wasn't a very helpful term. So I think we'll set out, I think that he's made a very sensible recommendation there, so we're actually considering that at the moment, and we'll respond to his report and set out our thinking there. But I mean, the main point is it's just about making sure that rather than a benefit where you effectively award something to somebody forever and you don't make any review of that, it's a review to do two things. One is to make sure that if someone's condition means they need more support, that they get that support, or if someone's condition has changed so they require less support, that you change the award accordingly. So it can go in both directions, but I think there's some lack of clarity about how it will work. And the other thing that we don't want to do, of course, is create unnecessary work in generating assessments and things where it's actually not necessary. So I think he makes a very sensible point that we need to think this through before the volume increases and causes any issues.
So I'm clearly being very dense, because as I understand it, an intervention is separate from a natural end of award reappraisal.
Well, I
still don't understand what would trigger an intervention if someone had a 3-year award.
Well, I think that his point is that it isn't clear at the moment, and he's recommended that we should look at our policy intent for reviewing people's awards make sure it's clear and that the guidance is clear, and make sure we explain to claimants that get awarded PIP when their award will be reviewed. So I think he was sort of agreeing with what you've just said, which is I think he's saying that it's not clear at this point, and that we need to go away and make sure that when someone gets a PIP award, it's very clear how long it lasts, what are the review processes, and he's sort of given us that task to go away with, and we'll respond to his on that issue when we respond to his report.
Okay, I think I need to go away and work out what.
It's probably a room
Not
with a damp
clear.
towel over your head.
Yeah.
Kwasi, you still want to ask me?
You set yourself very, I mean, you said this very openly, that you set yourself a very ambitious, if you like, target in terms of when you started, trying to sort of speed up the process. And of course, we've had this debate as to whether, it's working or not, which seems quite binary. I mean, clearly, in your view, it's the rate of progress and the direction is a good one. Even if we'll never reach the end point. But this is where I want to ask my question. I mean, what more do you think needs to be done for you to be satisfied that you've kind of accomplished the goals that you set yourselves? I mean, how would you judge yourself? Well, at this moment, in terms of your performance.
Well, I think there's two things. I think there's some numeric targets in terms of how long people take from when they make a claim to when they get a decision, and then there are the issues around the process, which Mr. Jackson mentioned. So I think just let me take those two briefly. So I think on the thing that was really causing a problem for people last year was the length of time it was taking, particularly to get an assessment.
Sure.
And as I said, I think we've made considerable progress. I mean, I think I characterised it in that way because I'm not trying to pretend there are no individual problems,
sure,
and that in absolutely every single case the experience of somebody is perfect. But I think if you look at last summer, where both the numbers tell us and the feedback that clearly MPs at that point were having from their constituents told them, there was a real problem, sure, and people were having to wait way too long. And I think we've made enormous progress since then. You're halving the times people are waiting, so that it's now much closer to where we would like it to be. But I said in my answer to Mr. Thornton that we want to go further, and the back end of the process, where we get the reports from the providers and make a decision, we'll set out the exact numbers when we publish the statistics, but resisting the temptation to start using unverified management information, I'd set out, I think, enough to the chairman to say that's in days, not weeks, to indicate that the end-to-end process, you don't take the wait for the assessment provider and then add another similar length of time on for a decision. It's much tighter than that. Can we go further? Yes, we can. And I think the test for us is what's the right length of time? How short can we make it that's commensurate with running an efficient system? Because there is a point at which if you have the work in progress is too short, you end up with the opposite problem that we've had, which I guess from the point of view of claimants might seem like a good problem, which is you end up with spare capacity in assessment providers, you end up with expensive people with not enough work to do, and that's not good from the point of view of the taxpayer and the cost of delivering the system. So what we're doing at the moment is working out how short can we make the time, but also deliver a very efficient system at a sensible cost for the taxpayer, so that it is sustainable and people have confidence it will continue. So I would say we've made considerable progress. I think we've hit the Secretary of State's ambition to get the process functioning now, in the sort of shape that is acceptable, but we still have more work to do. On process, I think Ms. Jackson made some, I think she perhaps would state it in a way I wouldn't, but I think her point that we can make this process better, I think we would disagree about where we think we're at, but I think we both have the ambition that we think we can make the process better. And I think Paul Gray's review set out, in terms of the evidence he got from people who've gone through the process and talking to the providers, I think he set out a range of things, short-term and medium-term, where we can improve the process. And I think we're working on some of those at the moment, and we'll be able to set out in the not-too-distant future, when we respond to his report, what we're doing and where we think we can make the process better.
Right, we need to move on. I've got very quick questions on residential training courses at colleges, and then we've got some questions on ESE. What is the situation with residential training colleges? Because obviously there's been some question over their funding, and will there be funding arrangements in place from September this year? Are they going to get longer term contracts? And obviously because of the fact that they didn't know if whether they were going to exist or not, obviously the numbers that are registering have dropped over recent years as well. And I know you've had discussions with them, so it's just to put on the record roughly where are they and what will be their future in 2 minutes, if you can do that.
So in 2 minutes, so I think residential training colleges, they offer some good provision for those people that go through the process. I think the problems are the contracts can't just be keep being rolled forward. There isn't we need to do a proper competitive process. The unit costs of of what they offer is too high, and although they notionally cover the whole country, in practice they only really deliver support around each of the locations. So what we want to try and do is make sure that the good work that they do is delivered to more people at a lower unit cost. There's a commercial process kicking off. My ambition, which I think is deliverable, is to make the decisions before the election, and all the colleges have been really clear they want us to make the decisions before the election because they want to know, they want some certainty for running their businesses so that we don't end up...
Do you agree that they should survive?
Well, I agree. My job is not to protect individual institutions. My job is to make sure that disabled people get the absolute best support that they can get at a sensible price for the taxpayer. So the process that we're going to undertake, the weighting in terms of the decision making for the contracts is going to be heavily focused towards quality, not price. So we're not going to buy any nonsense from people who don't do this work, who come along with a very good story but aren't actually able to do it. So my sense would be if those existing institutions put in a good bid, they've got a track record, and they can show how they're going to be more cost effective, then there's no reason why they shouldn't be successful. But it isn't the job of the government to protect individual institutions. It's to make sure we get the best
concept
outcome for the...
I think there was some with the SACE review, there was some concern that actually they were all going to go and they were all going to close. But you seem to be saying that the concept is a right one, but you need it at the right price, in the right place, delivering the right services.
In terms of what they deliver, they do deliver. We've looked at what they deliver, and they do deliver some valuable services, but the unit costs are too high. They don't deliver it across the country, and there also have been changes since they started, given that we now have the work programme and work choice and other things that didn't exist. So I think the model has to change, but a lot of those institutions are doing good things and supporting people, but I think what they're doing and the nature of what they're doing has to change, and that's why we've kicked off this process. We've engaged with them a lot. I've met with all of the college principals, and we had a very positive meeting. And I think
they said that. That's why I've given you the opportunity.
And I think we've got a process which they feel will enable. I hope I'm not putting words into their mouth, but I think they feel the way we've set up the process will enable them, I think, to have a fair crack of the whip in that bidding process to set out their stall and to have the opportunity to deliver those services. I think that will be a fair characterisation.
Thank you very much for that, and we've got some questions on the new WCA contract. And over to Graham.
Okay, thank you. What lessons have been learned from the Atos contract that was started under the previous government? You've got stringent management regime to meet stringent quality standards. How will DW's management differ from that of the Atos contract?
Well, I think we've learned a lot. I think the most obvious thing, I think, from my point of view, is the sense that when you're contracting a really important part of your business, I'm very clear, the responsibility of making this happen is still mine as the minister and the department. So you can't move that responsibility by contracting somebody, so it's still ours. I think in terms of the formal governance processes and the contract and the way we're going to manage it, I think that will enable us to do that. I think the most important thing is actually how we're going to manage it actually in terms of the day-to-day operations. We will have a team of people who are embedded with the provider, who know what's going on a daily, weekly and monthly basis, regular meetings to assess performance, and a proper partnership about how you deal with the inevitable issues that arise when you're running a big, complicated business. And I think my sense so far is the way we've working on the transition is that's demonstrated that process is working well. So Maximus bring an experience of doing health assessments. So they do health assessments in other countries for other customers. And we took up some of those references, if you like, before we awarded the contract. So they do know what they're doing. And the way that Atos and Maximus and the department have worked in this transitional process together as a tripartite organisation, the way that's worked, a very open way, I think gives me some confidence that actually the going forward process will work well. And I think does show we've learned from the past.
Having learned from the past, have you increased the in-house contract management expertise? Have you brought any new expertise in recent times for this contract?
We do have people in the department who have who do know what they're doing in this space, who are more closely aligned with the customer. I think we're much more all over what's going on, both in terms of the detail and the frequency with which we engage with them. And I think that engagement with Maximus is starting at the beginning of the process. So I think there's much more of a sense that it's a partnership. We need them to be successful. We need to be successful as well. And you can't somehow shift the responsibility by having the contract. I'm very clear. I'm responsible to Parliament for making this work, and I depend on our contractor to do that. So I will take a very close interest, and the department will, in managing this process on a day-to-day basis.
Because I know a lot of colleagues on the committee talk about process, but for me it's not just about the quantity, it's the quality. But at the end of the day, it's the outcomes, making sure it's the right outcomes. What is Maximus's payment agreement with you? Is it on a per assessment basis? Obviously, we want the quality to be in there as well as the quantity that we all want to do. And will Maximus earn bonuses based on reaching targets?
So we've, I'm sure no one's probably bothered to look at it. We've published, of course, the contract on Contract Finder with some redactions, but it's largely out there for people to look at. But I'm sure no one's probably wandered their way through it. But the way it works is it's a very different contract. It's a target cost incentive fee payment mechanism, which basically means we've agreed cost projections with them, but we also have full open book access to the general ledger. So remotely. So we know how much they've spent on the contract to deliver the contracted number of assessments. And there's a pay and gain share process if they don't hit their targets. And we have award fees where they hit their volume targets and their quality targets. So you can't just ram lots of assessments through if you're not delivering on quality. And there are service credits where the quality and volume standards are not met, and the department liability is capped should their costs overrun. So it's a different model, and it depends on much more transparency with how they're performing, and that we have access to that their financial information on a transparent basis. And I think that will lead us to a much more successful outcome, working together to deliver this important service.
What did you say then? The target incentive, or was it?
It's a target cost incentive fee payment mechanism, which
that's probably why we haven't read it.
Yeah, which is why I had to read it out of my folder. But it basically, in English, means that we awarded the contract. We'd agreed cost projections with them, but we get access to their systems to make sure we know what's going on. And if they exceed what it is they've said they're going to hit, then there's a cap on what we pay, and you share the sort of pain and gain of that process. So if they deliver more cost effectively, we get some of the reward for taxpayers. And if it costs more, we end up paying some of it, but it's capped, and they share some of that pain as well. I mean, Justin, if I accurately set that out.
That's correct. They've given us estimated costs for the lifetime of the contract plus the target fee. If they run over in terms of the actual costs incurred, then we split the pain of that. If they manage to make savings, then we split the gain from that. They have to pay all of the costs if it runs over 125% of the estimated cost.
Okay, and in terms of the Atos staff being tupied over to Maximus, how many staff does this involve, and how many are healthcare professionals, given that under Atos they sometimes struggle recruiting healthcare professionals, certainly in London in the South East?
So I will write to the committee with the exact numbers. What I can say is that we're actually ahead of where we thought we were going to be. So Atos have retained more staff, more healthcare professionals than we had thought they would. So they're actually handing over, if you like, the operation in better shape than we had assumed. And I thought one of the really important things about delivering this is the people. And so I actually met with the staff representatives who staff have elected to engage in this transition a couple of weeks ago, and I have to say they were incredibly positive about this process. You don't just have to take my word for it. The trade unions involved in this process, Prospect, have said that there's been a good transition. There's been a significant level of communication by both Atos and Maximus. They think that both companies have been very supportive of the staff through the period and acted really professionally and engaged well with trade unions. So the staff actually, despite the fact I wanted to talk to them about the transition, didn't actually want to spend very much time talking about the process of transition, because they actually think that they've been well communicated, they know what's going on. They were actually fizzing with ideas actually about how, once the transition's happened, how Maximus can deliver some of the improvements to the process. But I think, I don't want to overstate it, but I think the way the staff have been dealt with, more of them will be moving over. There were more with Atos than we had thought, so that makes the process, I think, smoother. And I think they think the process has worked really well. So I think that will get us off onto a very good start.
Okay, that sounds reassuring. So, do you think the healthcare professionals will all be in place? The required number will be in place by the 1st of March.
So Maximus will inherit the number of staff that, more than the number of staff we'd expected, but they're also expecting in their first year of operation to hire a significant number of new healthcare professionals. Mm-hmm. They've already started that work. They started that work once we'd signed the contract, and they are again ahead of that hiring profile. So they've already hired the staff that they were expecting to start in February and March, and they're already kind of through filling up their training programme into April. And they've had good responses to their advertisements, they've had good responses through the interview process, and they've had good responses when they've offered roles to people. So far, the people side, I think, is encouraging.
Yeah, for me that's key. That's key to most.
Well, those are the. I mean, the people. I mean, clearly you obviously need the estate and so forth, but it's the people that make the biggest difference to the quality of the assessment, the experience of customers, and interesting. Not just the healthcare professionals, but I met representatives of the different types of healthcare professional, but also the important administrative teams, you know, that actually deal with the issues that Ms. Jackson mentioned around, you know, appointments and the experience someone has when they arrive at an assessment centre and so forth. So all of those groups of staff, I think, are really engaged in this process, which I think is good.
Okay, and just quickly, regarding the estate will be provided by DWP,
yes.
what do you mean by that? Is it the existing estate, are the arrangements very similar to that, what was with
Yes, so
Atos?
Most of the estate is owned by the department. Some of the estate was owned by Atos, and so obviously there's a process of moving those leases and so forth to the department. There's a process underway with, as I said, with the department, with Atos and Maximus, to get all this to work very smoothly. There are regular meetings every week, which Justin leads. I've been to one of those meetings just to see for myself how how the groups interacted, and I have to say I was impressed by the grip that Maximus had on the business, but also the very open way that actually Atos have been working with us and Maximus to make this work. So I think it's a very clear sense. Clearly Maximus want this to work. the department wants it to work, but actually, to be fair to Atos, since we made the agreement with them last year for them to exit from the contract, they have delivered on what they said they were going to do and what we agreed with them, and they've behaved in a very professional way in terms of making sure we can transition this to a new supplier. So there's been quite a lot of partnership working in that process. So, so far, so good. I mean, there are obviously going to be, in a big contract like this, there are obviously going to be some teething problems and some hiccups, but I think the test is the contractor and the department going to work together so that any of those inevitable teething problems are properly gripped and sorted out, and I think those relationships are in good shape. I think it will be a fair... Would that be a... Yeah.
I'm going to move on. Teresa, I think, got an then to Sheila.
I'm very happy to hear that Atos are behaving well in this process, and I'm also happy to hear that the TUPE process is going well. Just something that I'd just like to raise with you is last summer when Atos came to us, they said one of the reasons for exiting the contract was the behaviour of claimants, and they made an accusation saying some claimants came to the process armed with knives, threatened receptionists, and they couldn't back up any of those claims, and the DWP didn't have any evidence of those claims. Doesn't the fact that all the staff are happy to be TUPE'd from Atos to the new provider to provide this same but changed service also throw doubt on that accusation that claimants were violent, basically?
Well, I have to say, I genuinely haven't heard that.
It was in June last year.
So I'll, now that you've told me that, I'll get my officials to go and pull it out for me. But I have to say, I didn't know that they had said that, and I wasn't aware of that. No, I'm not challenging. I'm just saying I simply wasn't aware of it. That's
but we found that as a committee hard to swallow. They couldn't back it up with anything, but the fact that the staff, who apparently the reason they were exiting, one of the main reasons they said, was because they needed to protect the staff. The fact that they're happy to carry on.
Well, what I thought was very encouraging when I met the staff.
I'm glad they're carrying
on.
What
I thought was very encouraging when I met the staff representatives actually was, first of all, we didn't spend very much time talking about the transition. I had to kind of force them to talk to me about it because actually they didn't really have any issues about the transition process. But also the staff, whether it was doctors or other healthcare professionals, or indeed those that do the administrative work, they were really focused on wanting to do a good job for the claimants who come through the door for an assessment. And actually they really all had lots of ideas about all the different bits of the process. And of course part of Maximus's bid is about improving that. So, picking up the points that Ms Jackson had in the PIP space about it's not just the numbers and the volumes and how long people wait, it's also about the experience. And so I know Maximus have made some appointments about looking at the experience of the customers. I know there's a slightly controversial appointment they made of Sue Marsh to be the head of customer experience to look at that. But they've also, I know, they're working closely with a lot of disability organisations to really try and look at it from the customer's end of the experience to try and improve it. And I think they've been very open. I know there was an article in or a letter in the Guardian this morning, I think from Phil Friend from Disability Rights UK, explaining why they wanted to work with Maximus and other organisations to try and look at it to get the customer experience to be good. And so I think the way they're approaching this, I think sort of bodes well. And I said I was impressed by the staff that I met that really keen to just get a really good level of service for customers, and I think they were very positive, and the trade unions supported that as well in terms of the way the process has been handled. I thought I'd bring that because I thought some people might find that slightly more convincing than me just telling them. It was very good.
One of the ways of judging whether the initial processes are working is things like the levels of overturn, appeal or reconsideration. And the reconsideration statistics you published just before Christmas did not give any indication of, still don't separate out the initial decisions from those that are overturned, which was the point that had been raised, I think, by the Office of National Statistics before as well. It had been raised by some of the independent reviewers. You still haven't been able to do that. Why not?
Well, I think just on the point about the mandatory reconsideration statistics, a part of the point of publishing those was that people had been implying that we'd invented this process so that we could just sit on all these cases for ages and ages and ages and ages and not have decisions made and stop people going to appeal. And what those mandatory reconsideration statistics showed for employment and support allowance was that we actually make the average time that it takes to do a mandatory reconsideration decision is 13 days, and we clear 3/4 of them in a month. And the ones that take longer than that are obviously the more complex ones. So I think it just showed people that it isn't a mechanism for stopping making decisions. I just wanted to make that point because people do allege that it was just a mechanism for stopping appeals happening, and that's not true. We make those MR decisions quite quickly, and those mandatory reconsideration statistics will become part of the normal statistics that get published in due course for each of the benefits.
Whether the decision was overturned or not.
So
what the statistics you published were about times again.
Yeah, they were, because that wasn't
the only issue.
No.
It certainly wasn't the only issue I had raised. The issue I had raised in the earlier debates I had was about, what the outcomes were and how you then judge the original process.
So I think the point where we want to get to is for mandatory reconsideration for each of the benefits that it applies to. We want the statistics for MR will be published with the statistics for those benefits. The reason for doing the ad hoc publication on mandatory reconsideration, I think, was to deal with the issue that lots of people had either said explicitly or had implied that somehow we'd invented a process that you had to go through before you could appeal, and that it was taking an extraordinary length of time. And I think the evidence shows that's simply not the case. The average length of time to clear one of those is 13 days, and 3/4 are done in 30 days. And as I said, you would expect the others to take longer because they're more complicated and you want to make the right decision. So that dealt with that. I take your point that it didn't deal with the success rates. My understanding is, and I will confirm or unconfirm it to the committee in writing, my understanding is when we start publishing mandatory reconsideration statistics as part of the normal process, we'll have timings in there, but we'll also have the outcomes of them, which I think is your question. But let me just confirm that, and I'll see if I can add anything onto timing of those becoming part of the normal statistical publication for the benefit of the committee.
Could I just ask in a different do you have any concerns at all, because some people have raised this issue with me and perhaps with others, that Dr. Bill Gunyon, who was in employment with the DWP and dealing presumably with the contracting process until he left in August, has already taken up a job with Maximus?
So my understanding is Bill Gunyon is working for Maximus as a consultant on a part-time basis. He is subject to restrictions under the Civil Service Code, which means he's not allowed to work on any contracts that he previously worked on in the DWP for at least a 6-month period. So that would apply for the Fit for Work contract that Maximus have and the contract for the WCA, and they have confirmed that in accordance with the provisions of the Civil Service Code, he does not work on either of those contracts for them. And he was also not involved in the decision-making process for the award of the contract to Maximus for the health assessments.
How many extra people to deal with sort of mental health expertise are being recruited? Because this has been an issue throughout, that it was felt that people didn't have enough expertise when they were carrying out WCAs. Has there been additional numbers, and if so, what's the new total?
Well, I think one of the things that Maximus, I think, is very keen to do is to make sure that they have, for mental health, but actually not just for mental health, for other areas as well, the expertise in their business. Now, you're not going to have... the way you've characterised it is that you wouldn't hire specific assessors to do mental health assessments, because actually people's conditions are more complex than that. So 46% of people on ESA, for example, have a mental health condition as their primary condition, but actually 60% of people have mental health as a part of their condition. So you can't just assess someone and go, you have a mental health problem, I'll get someone who's really expert at mental health, because actually, firstly, it's the impact on their life and their ability to work that you're assessing, but also people don't just fit those neat boxes. You know, someone with a mental health problem, they may also have a physical disability or health condition. The two things may be connected. They may have had a physical condition which meant they couldn't work, which meant that they then had a mental health problem. So I don't think it's that straightforward. What Maximus is looking to do is to make sure it has expertise in its business, in terms of people in the business who are experts on mental health, who can make sure that the level of expertise in all of its healthcare professionals is such that they can assess mental health and other health conditions properly. I think that's the way they're... I mean, Justin, if I characterise...
certainly the conversations I've had with Maximus, they've been very keen to expand the number of mental health champions they have. They will also want to look at having functional champions in areas like learning disability and maybe some other medical
Will we get
conditions.
information about that? Because
we'll certainly see what we
mental
can...
health champions before, and then there were a lot of questions.
There's also a requirement in the contract that they have to do a training needs assessment and produce a training plan by the summer, so we'll be making sure they cover mental health in that.
Many of the groups working with people with fluctuating conditions, and particularly progressive conditions, are still concerned about this whole issue of people often given a prognosis of unlikely to be able to work in the sort of quite long term, being placed in the work-related activity group. Now, this is an issue which it's not just, it's no light matter, because there is a financial difference between being in the two groups. There is an expectation difference, which could lead, for example, to people being sanctioned if they don't take part in certain activities. And thirdly, there is the whole question of losing your contributory ESA after 6 months, and therefore maybe being off ESA completely if you have a partner, for example. So this is it's quite a major issue, and these particular groups feel that people who are given an assessment that says unlikely to return to work for some considerable time, if ever, and in fact with a progressive disease, perhaps never, are still being placed in this group. Is this something that you're going to be addressing with the new provider?
Well, I think to some extent it comes back a little bit, in a way, to what Mr Maynard said in his question on PIP, and it's about the extent to which a diagnosis of a condition then you just assume it has some consequences.
But if the actual prognosis is unlikely to be working for... when we discussed, right back to the Bill Committee, when we discussed the whole question of time-limiting ESA, for example, one of the things that was said was you could have a time limit of this because, the expectation was that the majority of people would actually be able to return to work within those periods. But if somebody isn't being given that sort of prognosis, and the prognosis is actually written down as unlikely to be returning to work, why are they in this group?
Well, you mentioned two things there. There's a difference between someone who's unlikely to... their condition's unlikely to improve. That isn't the same as whether or not they're likely to be able to work.
The prognosis that she was talking about is a prognosis by the assessor, not by the medical...
No, I'm clear about that, but what she mentioned was... what Ms Gilmore mentioned was about... She mentioned two things. She said that unlikely to recover... She said unlikely to recover, but also unlikely to return to work. The reason I was making the distinction was... and this came out in Paul Litchfield's report, there are some, in the same way that there are some groups representing people with particular conditions that say that should be an automatic trigger for PIP, there are also people who say, well, if you have a diagnosis for a progressive condition and that you're currently not able to work, we should assume that you're never going to be able to work, so we should put you in the support group. Now, it does raise some interesting questions, because if you accept that premise, it has a rather unfortunate consequence, which is that if people get diagnosed with particular conditions that are progressive, what you don't want to do is assume that it's automatic, that the diagnosis means you can't work, your employer gets rid of you, and you have an expectation you're never going to work again.
Yes, but these people who are claiming this benefit, because in fact they have lost that employment, that's the point. They wouldn't be claiming this is a PIP. If somebody is in that position...
But the question then is, are they going to go back to work?
Probably because they've been through a medical examination or whatever it is at work, and they've been paid off because of their medical condition. So it's not as if they're... I think that... But, the point I was really making was that people have had prognosis as part of their assessment. They would be unlikely to be able to return to work in the longer term. I think it's often people in the categories I mentioned, but it's not because of their illness, it's because of the prognosis. And still with that prognosis, people have been placed in the work-related activity group.
I will go away and have a look at the point you make about if we're saying to people, and clearly the work-related activity group is where we're saying someone's not fit for work today, but we think they should be doing some work-related activity. And clearly, if there's obviously an argument about if you assume that someone's never going to go back to work, then you would normally have put them in the support group. So let me go and take that away rather than give you a glib answer now. Let me go and take that away.
And you might get the opportunity next Thursday in the Westminster Hall debate to answer.
Well, let me take that away, and then perhaps if Ms Gilmore's there, she can ask me that question next Thursday, and I'll see whether I can give her a fuller answer. And if she doesn't, it sounds like you will, Jen.
Okay, I've got Nigel, and then I've got Paul. So, and then we'll honestly, business we will be finished hopefully. No.
What's the backlog now? Quick.
On the WCA?
Yes.
So last February it peaked at 766,000 cases outstanding. At the end of December it was down to 527,000, so around 250,000 cleared through the period, so down by over 30%.
And given that Maximus had contracted for 1 million assessments in the first year, I mean, is that backlog going to be wiped out this year, or will it be dragging on?
Well, there was a slight difference. Our view and Maximus's view is it will take between 12 and 18 months to clear the backlog. The OBR, as you would probably expect from the OBR, was a little more cautious, and it said it would take 2 years to do that. So the OBR forecast of ESA spending assumed 2 years to clear the backlog. I said both Maximus and the department think it will be a little less than that. So you kind of work out where your confidence level is between, say, us and the Maximus and the department versus the OBR. The OBR took the more cautious view of 2 years.
And what's the target for Maximus to complete an assessment? Is it?
Do you mean in terms of how long people should wait for one?
Yeah.
Justin?
It's just a volume target on the numbers that they do. There isn't an end-to-end time target.
So there's not a kind of 16-week target like there is for PIP here, where...
I would say that in terms of the DWP parts of this process, there has been really significant progress. So nearly 90% of all claims are dealt with in 10 days now before they're passed on to Atos. When they come back from Atos, we're dealing with most of them in 5 days. So that bit has really speeded up.
I think I should say we want to deliver good customer service. I mean, it's different in this case, obviously, from the customer's perspective, because, of course, they are getting ESA at the assessment rate whilst they're waiting for the assessments. It doesn't have the same issue, but we want to make sure we get those assessments done for 2 reasons. One, because for people who would be in the work-related activity group or the support group, we want them to get the support they get without having to have it backdated. But also, for those people who are fit for work, I want them to be engaging with the labour market. It actually doesn't do them any good if you're going to be found fit for work to be out of the labour market for a long time while you're waiting for your WCA. Actually, it's in your interest and everybody else's interest, actually, for a swift decision so that you can be engaged with Job Centre Plus. And, you know, given there are 700,000 vacancies and there are lots of opportunities for people, we want you to be giving the help and the support to get you back into the workplace. So I think we want to make that process as swift as we can.
And what's the plan for reassessments of ESA and IB? Are they going to be restarted or stepped up?
So for the IB reassessments, the bulk of them are done. So 1.3 million of them are done, and we're actually still doing some each month where people are requesting those, and we're still doing some re-referrals of ESA cases. Again, in both cases around 6,000 and 6,500 a month. And people can, where the circumstances have changed, they can be reassessed. Clearly, as Maximus grows its capacity and we're comfortable with all of the new claims, then obviously we can get those referrals done, you know, over that period. But again, we'll be very sensible about how we do that, so that what we don't want to do is go to a customer and say we're going to refer you for an assessment and then have them wait an inordinate amount of time for it. So it's making sure we do that commensurate with Maximus's growth of their capacity. And as I said, they've already started hiring and putting in place the training plans for the new capacity of the people that they're hiring. They've already started that work, and that work has started off in a good way.
Very quickly, or I should try to make them quick. Lichfield review. I'm sure your answer will be that you're looking at it and will respond in due course. But there are two areas I think of sufficient concern that I want placing on the record in the committee today. One is the substantial increase in numbers being placed in the support group. Partly it appears being driven by the number of young people being placed through Regulation 35(2)B under the severe mental and physical risk. Most frightening of all is the fact that 34% of those individuals are being placed there without having had a face-to-face assessment. Are you looking into this? Do you have any preliminary views on what might be driving it, and whether the 50% in the support group is what you would now expect? Are you surprised by that figure?
So two things. Three things. The first thing is, yes, generally for Lichfield, I've made it clear that the government will respond to the Lichfield report this Parliament, so before the House is dissolved, so we'll deal with all of those issues then. Your specific point is one I commented on at the meeting when Paul Lichfield presented his report. I was concerned by that figure as well, because apart from anything else, I don't think putting an 18 to 24-year-old in the support group with a mental health problem and just leaving them there, it's not doing them any favours. I mean, actually, if they really do have a serious mental health problem, we ought to be making sure they get some treatment and support for it and a plan to deal with it and get them back into the workplace. So I have commissioned some work, and officials are looking at those statistics. They're looking at the process, and we'll be able to respond to that. But I was concerned by that myself, and that work is ongoing. I don't have any preliminary information I can share with the committee, but we will do so when we respond to the Lichfield report.
Finally, you'll be pleased to hear, and equally concerning, is the situation in prisons for prisoners and ESA that Dr. Lichfield drew attention to. Can you comment on why there might be different rules for PIP eligibility when in prison and ESA eligibility? Why prisoners may not be able to apply for ESA pre-release, and also, importantly, the fact that there's been changes in how primary care is delivered in the prison service, that's building in delays in transferring the medical information. Have you taken similar steps with regard to ESA for prisoners in terms of doing some preliminary work before you respond to Lichfield?
So again, I don't have anything to add at this stage, but that is one of the areas we're looking at. I think it's fair to say in the past, the process for somebody who came out of prison and their ability then to get proper services so that we minimise their chance of returning to prison and maximise their chance of being successful wasn't brilliant. I remember when I was the Shadow Minister, working, I think it was with Turning Point, and talking to them about how they engage with prisoners and were they able to do that pre-release or post-release. And pre-release was tough, so I think that issue that Lichfield's flagged up, I think, is an important one. I think we would want to make sure, particularly with the changes in rehabilitation that are being delivered, I think starting next month by the Ministry of Justice, we would want to make sure that somebody who's in prison we're able to make sure that their chances of getting into work and not reoffending again and being a contributor to society are maximised. And I want to make sure that all the bits of that are properly joined up. So I think Lichfield was a good issue for him to raise. And I say we'll respond to that, but I don't have anything, I'm afraid, Mr Maynard, to add at the committee today.
Okay, well, thanks very much, Minister. There is the Westminster Hall debate next Thursday afternoon.
Looking forward to it.
It's just an hour and a half. We could go on for a lot longer, and we could have gone on for a lot longer this morning, but our time is limited. But thank you very much, Senator, for coming along this morning.
Thank you, Chair.
We really appreciate it. Order, order.
Portcullis House, the Grimmond Room.